Okay, with problems at home and multiple conflict centres abroad, it's easy to forget the domestic politics of the United States is actually something that's going to directly impact us and much of the rest of the world too. It's fair to say it's in a state of disarray with an ethically and cognitively compromised president, a clueless vice president and a leading contender for the Republican nomination who is one of the most polarising figures in politics. Joining me now to distill what this means for us is Sky News contributor Kosha Gada, who joins me from the delightful Barossa Valley. I'm envious, Kosha, but thank you for sharing your time with me tonight. Hey, former Vice President Mike Pence has quit his quest for the presidency. Do you think this is a sign that Donald Trump has actually got a lock on the Republican nomination now?
Great to be with you as always, Cory. I think it's definitely a corroborating signal, but it's just corroborating what's been the pattern pretty much since Trump declared that he was running. He is 40, 50, even as high as 60 points ahead his next contender, which is typically Ron DeSantis in the race. And all of these things just absolutely corroborate this. But as you know, this is not a normal election cycle. And even if in terms of where the Republican electorate and the Republican constituency stands, Trump is far and away leading this, there are other dynamics at play. He is in legal peril with the 4 lawsuits against him and potentially more coming. There is the issue of the mechanics of the election where, the last election, I always remind people, was decided by 41,000 votes. That was the narrowest division between the outcome that we had. So in a country that's that divided and when the margin of victory is so thin, the mechanics of which party is better at turning out the vote matters, and that tends to be the Democrat Party. And then the third dynamic is the wild cards out there. So RFK Jr. running as an independent, could that cannibalize 1 to 2 percentage points of votes? All of that, I think, is going to come into the mix. But within the Republicans, Trump is still reigning supreme.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors in there. But Donald Trump is pulling no punches himself. Here's what he had to say in a recent speech.
We don't want to be like Europe with jihads on every corner. That's what happens. I mean, we're going to be like Europe. You take a look at London, you take a look at Paris, you take a look at what's going on over there. We want to be the United States of America.
Now, Kosha, I know a lot of people who actually share those concerns, and particularly in America with Biden's open borders. So how do you think this sort of rhetoric will resonate with the American people? Could it make things even more tense for America, or do you think it will unite people and say, no, we've actually got to look after our own country?
I think it's definitely resonating, and the events recently that happened in the south of Israel bring it back to the forefront, because after 9/11, there hasn't really been a large-scale attack of that nature in the U.S. You had San Bernardino in California, nightclub shootings in Florida, but nothing quite of that scale. So this sort of brings it back to the top of mind for people. But then the second thing really is tying that to the border. And the border issue is absolutely gaining momentum in the minds of Americans and the kitchen table issues that they're discussing. Because you have now 8 million plus illegals that have come into the country under Joe Biden. Obviously, it was happening before that. We don't even know how many there are. There are estimates that right now, as we sit here, the U.S. has anywhere from 20 to as high as 50 million illegal immigrants in the country. That's as high as potentially 15% of the population. You can't run a country with that where you don't even know where 15% of the population comes from and, what they're in there illegally. That is absolutely cutting right now through as one of the top 1-2 issues along with the economy. And so I think he knows that. Trump always has his finger on the pulse of what concerns certainly a large swath of the electorate. And I think it's no accident that he's saying those kinds of things on the stump.
Yeah, and there are lots of reports that the Democrats, of course, want to give the vote to these illegal immigrants. And that, of course, would change possibly the outcome of an election. As you mentioned, it's so narrow. But can we turn to the Democratic side of politics for just a second? It seems to me, and this is about criminality, which you mentioned about Trump, it seems every time investigators make public some evidence of the Biden family links to corruption, some world event sucks the oxygen out of the room. How strong is the suggestion that President Biden has been involved in very questionable family business?
It's getting harder and harder, I think, for people to ignore. But as you mentioned, Cory, there's always something happening in the news. It's a very noisy news cycle, and the media does tend to run interference or run cover for this issue. It's hardly gotten any breakthrough We saw that with the Hunter Biden laptop story back in the last election, and that MO still continues with the mainstream media. But despite that, it's really interesting. There are polls coming out. There was a Yahoo News YouGov poll that came out a couple of weeks ago that said 47% of Americans believe there's something sketchy or shady happening with the Biden family business dealings, even if they don't know the nitty-gritty of it. And there are other polls that position that even higher. So despite that media blackout or lack of curiosity, the fact that this is bubbling through, I think, is quite telling. Most people don't know the nitty-gritty, but there's certain things, certain kernels from the story that really stick in people's minds. How could Hunter Biden be on the board of a company getting $80,000 a year? Like, that factoid sticks with people. The fact that the Biden administration interfered when he was vice president, interfered inside internal Ukrainian politics and had that prosecutor fired. That's another thing that sticks in people's minds. And then it puts a different light on the fact that we're sending all this funding in there. And then the IRS whistleblowers that came forward, I think, is something else that sticks in people's mind. Like, are they doing funny business with their taxes? Because everybody understands taxes. Nobody likes taxes and those kinds of things. I think really great people. So I think it's bubbling through, but still, given the fact that the media won't cover it, it's not getting quite the airplay that you would otherwise think it would.